Welcome to the Business SOS podcast. This is Rich Sierra, president of the Florida Small Business Legal Center. This is episode 114th of the Business SOS podcast. Thank you for listening, and I hope the information I provide to you every week is helpful to you and your business. Today we're going to talk about a different topic, and this is going to be a two-part series on this topic. And I covered this maybe about a year ago. So I'm going to revisit it again. I think it's important to know about this. And so I'm going to talk about franchises today. Franchises 101 and what every business owner needs to know. We all know what a franchise is. In fact, many of us have actually used some of these franchises for ourselves. We know about McDonald's, Subway, Tint World, for example. The reason that comes to mind is I need to tint my windows in my new car. So I just thought about them. And in fact, they in my office building, they actually have their meetings every month. So that kind of comes to mind. And again, they're not a sponsor. Maybe I'll get a discount on my tinted windows, but I mentioned them in the show. But it's an example of a franchise. So in terms of, why people go into franchises, why business owners go into franchises, and there are a number of reasons why. And one of the benefits of franchising is that you have a system that is successful. And have you heard me in the past as I talk about business ownership? And in fact, the last episode that I covered was about the importance of a business plan. So when you go into a franchise, you already have the business plan made out for you. You already have it prepared. You're walking into a system that is a known brand. An example, obviously, is McDonald's. It's one of the most famous franchises in the world. You're already a recognized brand. You also have, in most cases, a protected territory that is protected from another franchisee coming in and competing against you. And you also have a business system that, for the most part, is proven to be successful if you follow their training and their plan. And you also have the license to use their brand exclusively for the use of the franchise. In return, you would have to pay, obviously, a fee. And in many cases, you also pay royalty fees as well for the use of that franchise, for that brand, and use of their system. And if you're in business, most likely you have been invited to, or you have seen many ads for franchise expos. I know they have them here in Miami. They have them in Broward County as well, in Fort Lauderdale. And they have them all over the country. You have hundreds of franchises going in and setting up their booth for you to go in and to learn more about their business opportunity. How to get into that franchise and what is in it for you and how successful you can be. In my years of 21 years now of practicing law, I've been involved in a number of franchise disputes. Usually involved a franchisee, not being happy with the franchisor, or you don't sue, but you're not being happy. But in essence, there's a dispute as to the contract provisions, or the franchisor suing the franchisee for not meeting the contract requirements. And that's where come into play. In my experience, sometimes business owners get into a franchise, or they purchase a franchise or open a franchise, not understanding the obligations that they have as a franchisee. And they go into with a great deal of optimism, and they underestimate the type of work that it will require to make this franchise successful, or the capital requirements that it will require to make the franchise successful. And that becomes a trigger for a potential breach of contract dispute. And I'll give you an example. The franchisee buys the franchise, pays the franchise fee, goes to their 2-week training or 3-week training, whatever training the franchisee may have. franchisor may have, and they go and open the franchise, but they underestimate the requirements for staffing. They don't staff the franchise properly, or they don't generate enough sales because they didn't do the proper marketing. And in some franchise agreements, you have a minimum royalty you have to pay. Whether or not you make sales, you have to make sales, obviously, but if you don't meet the minimum threshold that the franchisor requires, you got to pay a certain surcharge, because you're going to be paying monthly regardless, whether you make the threshold to pay through royalties or whether you got to pay that monthly fee. And what happens is that sometimes the franchisees do not meet that, do not make enough money to make that franchise fee or make that royalty or the minimum requirements. So you have an issue of default that happens. And then you start getting default letters that you have to comply with the minimum requirements for payments, or you're going to be, made in default or declared in default. And then the franchisor has a number of rights that they have in order, whether it's to take the franchise over, whether to terminate the franchise. There are a number, or sue you as well for damages, especially if you have personal guarantee. It just escalates and escalates and escalates. So how do you avoid that? And I'm not saying that it's not a good idea to go into a franchise. And I think if you have any takeaway here is that if you're going to go into a franchise, make sure you understand what you're getting into. Like any business, you still have to do due diligence. You still have to, interview other franchisees. And not from the consumer perspective, which is also important to do that as a private, do like a secret shopper and just find out really how those franchisees work, but also from the type of support that the franchisor will provide to you. And I'll give you an example. Many years ago, I was involved in like 2 years of litigation against a franchisor for a restaurant franchise in the Orlando area. There were a number of franchisees involved in this particular litigation. And there were at least 10 or 15 franchisees that were being sued. We sued back. Again, there was 2 years of litigation that we all got involved with. And what I learned, in my impression of what happened here, is that from the franchisee's perspective, my impression that many of them got involved not understanding the franchisee, the franchisor. There were many different provisions of that contract they did not understand. And some of them were successful restaurant owners before. And also, I believe that the franchisor, in this case, did not grew too fast and did not provide the proper training necessary to the franchisees. But also the franchisor made some other statements and misrepresentations that led to the dispute. And clearly, I'm not mentioning any names here. It's not necessary to do that. But when you have so many franchisees that are suing the franchisor for the same thing, something obviously went wrong. And when I began to look at the type of how many franchisees they were signing up in such a short period of time, and it was just not enough time to properly train them effectively to be successful. And so that was just a lesson that many people learned, unfortunately, the hard way. And so what I see happening here with other franchises, that sometimes, and this happens with couples that are semi-retired, that are about to retire, they go to this franchise expos. They work for regular jobs for, say, 20 years or more. and they're about to retire. They have a good amount of money in their retirement account. They never ran a business before. And then what happens is that by not running a business before, they go into this franchise thinking that the franchisor is going to teach them how to run a business. And they will understand the concepts of marketing, accounting, finance, staffing, payroll. No. And they buy this franchise. They put about $100,000 into this franchise or more if you have to do a build out in some cases. And they find out, oh, wow, I got a 2-week training at a facility, or perhaps at a training facility, or perhaps at another franchisor's location, franchisee's location, and they are expected to run a business with 2 weeks training. And if I had a criticism of some franchisors is that there's a disconnect between what is promised to them about their likelihood of success to the reality of running the business. They're two different things. And if you go to one of these expos, and I've been, and they're very informative, they're a lot of fun. You get to meet a lot of different people and get to talk to potential, franchisors that you might want to get involved with. Everything is very positive. Everything is very, and again, they're trying to sell you something. So nothing wrong with that. But you have to go in with a cautious mind in understanding that whoever is telling you about this franchise, their job is to sell a franchise. Your job is to do your due diligence. And I believe, in my opinion, that if you're going to go into a franchise, you have to have some basics about running a business. And many franchisors offer that training. They might offer ongoing support. But you have to understand, if you've never been in business before, you're going to go into a franchise, you need to ask the question, what type of support will I receive? I've never done this before, never run a business before. So I need help with the accounting, with the payroll, staffing, HR, marketing. What type of support will I receive? Because that's very important. If you're basically left alone to run your own franchise without support, there's a likelihood you're not going to make it. So you have to understand that. So let's talk a little bit more about the franchise disclosure document. So this is a requirement for the Federal Trade Commission. If you're going to interested in buying a franchise, pursuant to the FTC rule, the franchisor has to give you what is called a franchise disclosure document, commonly known as the FDD. So, and that document has 23 different disclosures that they're required by law. And they have to give you at least 14 days to review before you sign the franchise agreement. It's very important. Okay, you receive the franchise disclosure document. You're given at least 14 days to review it before you sign a franchise agreement with the franchisor. That is federal law. Now, I get a number of calls from people wanting to buy a franchise. And, they ask me if I can review the FTD, and the answer is yes. And there are many attorneys that offer that service as well. And I think that's if I would give you an advice here, is that if you go looking into a franchise, retain a counsel to help you review the franchise disclosure document, help you with some due diligence about the franchise, and advise you as to your obligations that you have with that franchise, with that franchisor. It is very important that you do this. The document is about 200 pages. They send it to you electronically. You sign kind of receipt that you received it, and they give you some time to review it. The cases that I've been involved with that franchisees are suing the franchisor or vice versa, are the ones that in most cases the franchisee did not retain counsel before signing the franchise agreement. And I asked the question, why you did not retain counsel beforehand, and the answer was to save money. Nothing wrong with that, but at the same time, some of these franchises, you might end up investing $500,000. In some cases, I've seen people invest their life savings into this business. So to save a few $100s, to give you the advice on whether or not this might be an opportunity for you, when you're putting on the line $500,000, it does not make any sense. These documents were prepared by attorneys for the most part, or consultants that are highly skilled in the business of franchising. So you have to level the playing field as to the advice that you receive when you're going into a venture that you do not know anything about. So it's important that if you're looking at this franchise, you get the FDD. My recommendation is to get counsel and to help you understand your obligations in the franchise. So let me tell you some of the disclosures that are required. And I don't have time to go through each of them individually and go through a great deal of depth, but I'm getting this information from the FTC Franchise Rule Compliance Guide. And that's available on the FTC website and the Federal Trade Commission website. And also, I will make this available in my show notes for the podcast and also for the video. Go there, you can click on it, you can download it. It's a long document, you can just take a look at it, okay? One of the things that they have to disclose, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm just going to tell you, some of them here in this segment. The franchisor and affiliates, who is the franchisor and who are the affiliates. In some cases, you have some franchises or some what they call company-owned stores that aren't necessarily franchised. They'll disclose that. They'll disclose whether the franchisor is a separated company who's licensing the brand for the purposes strictly of franchising. So there are different structures, but it tells you about how the company is structured, who is in charge, any affiliates that they have. That is disclosed there. It is important also, number two, the business experience of the management team. This is very important to look at. And who's the CEO of the franchise, who's the director of business development, marketing, finance, all the key officers will be listed in this franchise disclosure document. So how much franchise experience they have, look at their LinkedIn page, you'll have their names there, so you'll be able to do a little bit of background check, so to speak, through the LinkedIn page and just find out more about them. Another aspect that they look at is litigation history. This is very important. It is not uncommon for especially for franchisors and franchisees, to be in litigation at some point, especially if it's a franchise that's been around for a while. Things will happen. It doesn't mean that just because the franchisor got sued, you should not go into the franchise, but they have to disclose litigation history. So if you see one or two lawsuits that happened 5 years ago, things happen. And if the franchisor has been around for, say, 20 years, that's gonna happen at some point. Try to avoid it, but it happens. Okay. Now, if you begin to see 10 of these lawsuits, okay, and especially some of them are recent, that is a red flag for you to look at and say, okay, I need to find out more about these. And they have to explain to you the who the parties are in the litigation, who's the plaintiff in this case. The defendant may be the franchisor, or the franchisor is suing a franchisee. Who is the defendant franchisee? And they have to give you a synopsis of what happened with that litigation, whether it's ongoing. They give you a summary of the type of claims that they have that they're asserted in either side. It might be a breach of the franchise agreement. For the most part, you'll see that on both sides. But they'll give you a synopsis, kind of a summary of that. They'll give you the style of the court, when I say the style of the court, I say who the parties are, but also where is this lawsuit been filed, and I'll tell you the actual case number. With that information, your attorney will be able to go to the court docket, to that specific court, and pull that case. And at the very minimum, look at the complaint that was filed initially, and see the history of the litigation. Okay, so that way you'll be able to advise you, okay, this is where the case is at. This is what the trend that I see. This is what the common themes, or is this lawsuit an outlier? Again, I'm not suggesting this because there's a litigation between a franchisee and a franchisor, you should not go into it. What I'm saying is that if there's litigation between the franchisee and franchisor, then you should look into it further to make a determination whether there are trends here. Trends in the type of litigation, especially if there's several of them. You want to find that out and ask questions. Your attorney can help you with that. Whether or not the franchisor has filed bankruptcy, that's important to know as well. And they have to disclose any bankruptcy history. And before I go into further, one of the things I look at is how long has a franchise been around? And obviously, a franchise has to start somewhere. So it just doesn't mean that if there's a new franchise, you should not get into it. But obviously, there's no history behind it. So the due diligence has to be a little bit different when there's no history from that franchisor as to how many franchisees they have, how long they've been around. Better look at that. The initial fees, usually you have an initial fee that is non-refundable. And I've seen franchise fees going from $5,000 to $50,000, $60,000. And this is one that I have a little bit of an issue in some cases. In many cases, you have a situation that, actually most of them, when you have a franchise, you have to find a location. You have to have a storefront or a place that you will be conducting business from. And that, if it's something that has a protected territory, that you're dealing with consumers, and then you have a territory that's protected, that lease has to be approved. That location has to be approved by the franchisor, because they want to ensure the greatest level of success, but also because they want to make a decision as to where you will place that brand. Where's that brand is going to be located at? And they have different criterias, but they will approve the location. So what happens in this case? I've seen franchise agreements that before you actually get into a location, before you select a location, they approve that lease. Yes, the landlord, the franchisor has to approve that lease as well. You're required to make this large franchise, this large initial fee, which is completely, in most cases, non-refundable. I still yet to see one that is refundable. In fact, in one case, we negotiated one that was supposed to be refundable, and they did not return the funds, so we had to sue them. So And that's one of the issue that I have to pay an initial fee before a location is selected, because you really, without the location, you don't have a franchise. So that's something that should be negotiated, that if the location is not acceptable to you or the franchisor, or you don't qualify for the lease for whatever reason, let's assume you do, then that initial franchise fee is refundable. But there's an initial franchise fee in most franchises. So that's something to look at. And a lot of times when people call me, it's because they did not want to pursue their lease. There was a disagreement between the franchisor and the franchisee as to where the location was going to be at, or in some cases, the location they actually had in mind. I remember a case that I had, the location they actually agreed upon was no longer available, and then there was no place that they would agree to, and they still did not want to return the franchise fee. So you have to kind of be cognizant of the fact that not to believe said, no, we're gonna go ahead and get this, we'll find a location for you, don't worry. No, worry about it, because it's your money. So you take a step. That's why the attorney is important for you to have, to protect that initial investment. So there's an initial franchise fee, and please pay attention to the terms of the initial franchise fee. And in some cases, people are flexible. I've seen cases say, yes, we'll make it refundable if we do not agree on a location, or we cannot find one. That's fine. So there are many ways that this can be done. But it's important for you to understand that in most cases, in fact, in all the cases that I've seen, the initial franchise fee is non-refundable. So, and that can be a lot of money out before you actually decide where you're going to work, where you're going to operate from. Understand the other fees, royalties, advertising, and training. And I'm probably going to, after this, we'll stop there and then go for the next, finish there with the next segment. So you're going to be paying royalties. What are the royalties? What is the amount of royalties you got to pay per sale? And what I've seen is that you have to use what is called their own POS system. The franchisor will have access to all your financials. They will have access to all your sales. And in fact, in many cases, you will use their own system to collect the fees, the credit card fees, payments, all the sales. That's the way they will know how much you owe them. So they'll have access to your financials, and you have to be okay with that if you're going to have a franchise. So they will see you will use their own POS system, which they already have a vendor that you must use, and they will install it and you will pay for that. But they will have access to that system to ensure that they're getting the royalties that they are entitled to pursuant to the franchise agreement. So say 7% every time that there's a sale, there's a purchase, there's a transaction, 7% goes to the franchisor, and then they'll calculate it, they send you a bill, they automatically take it from your account. Yes, in most cases, that is automatically done. So it's not that they're gonna send you a bill, but automatically that money's gonna come out of your account. So another thing that I see here happening in terms of why some business owners fail at franchising is the lack of cash flow management. And we talked about that in the last segment, understanding how the cash flow works, understanding that if you make a sale via credit card, you got to take out some of the money that is going to go to the merchant. Okay. And then when is that sales cycle? When is that the money's going to make it into your account? And in this particular case, talking about franchises, you have to have enough money set aside. So at the end of the month or whatever the cycle is that the franchisor collects his fees, that is going to come out of the account. So that cash flow management is very important. Where people run into trouble is that they don't make those plans. They don't plan for that. They pay expenses and payroll out of that account, and they don't have enough funds. And then when the franchisor automatically tries to draw the franchise fee, the royalties, it bounces. It does not have enough funds to cover that. And so cash flow planning is very important, and having the right amount of working capital to allow for that gap on cash flow is essential. So I'm going to finish here for this segment, but I want to continue the conversation on the next segment on franchises. This is it good for today. Again, this is Rich Sierra, Florida Small Business Legal Center. If you want to reach me, you can send me an email at richsierra.com. If you want to take a look at my website, learn more about our legal services that we offer at the Florida Small Business Legal Center, my website is floridasmallbusinesslegalcenter.com. We're on Facebook at FSB Legal. If you want to see the video of this podcast and all of our videos that we have of the prior podcasts we've done in the past, we're on youtube.com/@RichardSierra. If you want to give us a call, my number is 866-842-5202. Remember my book, Business SOS, Common Legal Mistakes Business Owners Make and How to Avoid Them. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can ask for it in your local bookstore. Until next week, this is Rich Sierra. Remember that my goal is to help you succeed.